you doing, man? You doing all right?
I'm not bad. You?
I am doing okay. I'm doing okay. Bit show weirdness today with other guests, but it's okay. Thank you for joining me. I deeply appreciate it. David Hundeyin. He is investigative journalist, author, filmmaker, founder of West Africa Weekly, and the 2023 James Curry Fellow at Cambridge University. Can I out your other thing or still no?
Can
I
you
want to
do
give
what?
publicity.
Sorry.
Can I give publicity to your other endeavor? I don't want to out
Oh
it
yeah,
if you
yeah,
don't want
yeah,
me to.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely.
David has a radio
If you want,
station,
it's fine.
and that radio station has just been launched. David, what is the name of that radio station?
It's not a radio station. It's an online platform.
It's an online platform. Okay. Either way, it's fantastic. And I love the fact that you're able to pull this off. What is the name of the platform so the audience will know and they can find you?
Right. It's called the Spearhead. So the handle on Twitter and on Instagram is at spearhead_AF. So Spearhead
Okay.
Africa.
Very cool. Very cool. How did the launch go, by the way?
Just 1 second. Is my picture lagging? Because if it is, I can switch my Wi-Fi. So just let me know
No, you look
so that
fine.
it
So
doesn't.
far, you look good. No, you look good.
All right.
You look
All right, good.
you look good.
All right, perfect.
Uh,
Perfect.
how did the launch go, by the way?
Very stressful, but I'm alive, so let's just do it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, I wanted to bring you on. Initially, there were other topics from last week, but this week, Donald Trump has effectively threatened Nigeria, claiming that there's a genocide of Christians that are taking place in Nigeria. Now, let's put aside the fact that Donald Trump effectively paid billions of dollars for the massacre and the murder of Palestinians. Let's put aside the fact
Yeah.
that Israel is still murdering Palestinians. I mean, they murdered 100 the other day in 24 hours. Let's put all that aside, which is a massive amount to put aside. Is there a genocide of Christians taking place in Nigeria at the moment?
Um, there is a genocide of Nigerians taking place in Nigeria. Now, the use of the word genocide, um, I have to admit is very problematic because where you have a sustained pattern of mass killings affecting both Christian and Muslim populations, and the attackers are supposedly Islamists. What do you call that exactly? This, I guess, has been a problem that even I have contributed to in some way. As you may recall, I was part of a project team that put together a report back in 2019, which was presented to the then US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, which led to Nigeria being designated as a country of particular concern back in November 2020, shortly before Trump, in October 2020, shortly before Trump lost the US election. And the title of that report was Genocide in Nigeria, Silent Slaughter, Genocide in Nigeria and Implications for the International Community. And I guess the thrust of that report was that even though both Muslims and Christians are being killed in these areas, that the rate of Christian deaths is higher than the proportion of Christian deaths is higher than the proportion of the Christian population in those areas. So let me use a simple illustration to explain this. So assuming there's a village and there's 1,000 residents, and there are 900 Muslims and 100 Christians in that area, and then the attackers come in and say they kill 100 people, and they kill 60 Muslims and 40 Christians, right? So the thrust of that report is that based on the population share that Christians have, they were being killed at a disproportionate rate, which is why the word genocide was then used. But the report also made it very clear, or stated that overall more Muslims actually have died in these mass killings. So, which is why I said that the use of the word genocide is a problem. It's probably something that I have contributed to as well. And in hindsight, it has created problems even for me now because um, obviously at the time when I contributed to this report, maybe I didn't have the level of geopolitical awareness that I do now, and I didn't quite understand the significance of working on such a report and then submitting it to a foreign government for a foreign government to essentially sanction your own country. In hindsight, if I were to go back in time, would I do the same thing? Probably wouldn't, because I can sort of see the world from a wider perspective now. But at the time, I thought I was doing the right thing. And some of that work, which I myself did, some of that documentation work is what is now being cited and what is now being used as a premise for this myth, this falsehood that is being peddled now by Donald Trump and his, white nationalist friends, that there is this campaign to exterminate Christians from Nigeria, that Muslims are fine in Nigeria, and that Christians are being specifically targeted, and basically Christians are going to be wiped out from Nigeria if something isn't done, which is a stupid, ridiculous idea. Nigeria's population split between Christian and Muslim is almost 50-50. I think it's the official numbers put it at about 48% Christian and about 52 or 51% Muslim. So how do you propose to exterminate half of the population in the first place? Mathematically, the numbers don't make sense. And then on the ground, that is not what is happening. Both Christians and Muslims are being killed, are being attacked, and there are actually more Muslims dying. However, the argument that report that I worked on put forward, and the argument that is the basic argument that is being cited, I think rather disingenuously now in hindsight, is that because the areas where this violence is affecting are generally Muslim dominated areas, and Christians are a minority in those areas, and the violence there is affecting Christians at a rate that is disproportionate to their population share in those areas, then it's a genocide of Christians, which completely ignores the obvious question that the Muslims who died, who number more than the Christians who died, what do you call that then? Is it also a genocide? You can't call it a genocide because the attackers are purportedly Muslim. So if it's Muslims killing other Muslims, what do you call that? And that's a question no one has answered, and everyone has sort of stayed away from. So that's kind of like an overview of this very confusing situation that we find ourselves in now, and a very politically explosive situation now.
Yeah, I mean, Trump went so far as to say he's talking about putting in U.S. military on the ground. Who is doing the killing? What groups are responsible for the killings of both Muslims and Christians in these areas?
So we know the names of a few. So groups like Boko Haram, groups like ISWAP, that's the Islamic State West Africa Province, groups like the JNIM, which recently conducted its first attack in Nigeria, groups
Mhm.
like AQIM, that's Al Qaeda in the Maghreb, which has also the Maghreb is basically North Africa, but it's also that group has supposedly been active in Nigeria as well. And then there's
Yeah,
all sorts of other armed groups that we actually don't even know who and what they are, right? So the issue with northern Nigeria, which by the way is part of the Sahel region geographically, the issue with the Sahel region in general, that because it's so vast and because a lot of it is so unpopulated or sparsely populated, a lot of it is basically ungoverned territory.
I see.
Right? So because of
I
that,
see.
it's actually quite difficult to actually even quantify who and what is active in these areas, what exactly is going on. So in Nigeria, there's a popular term in the media which is now used to encapsulate all of these things. They just call them bandits or unknown gunmen because we literally don't know who these people are at this point.
Wow. Okay. I guess the secondary question is where are they getting the military armaments from? I mean, military armaments are expensive. Bullets are expensive. Guns, etc. Where's the stuff coming from? How are these groups being armed, or do we know?
So the popular and I guess the orthodox answer to that question is that after the fall of Gaddafi, that Libya's arms stockpiles were raided by all sorts of characters, and that those arms made their way across the Sahara, then across the Sahel, and those arms are what are feeding the violence all over these places. There's certainly an element of truth in that.
Mhm.
However, how much of Gaddafi's stockpile could have kept this incredibly wide-ranging campaign of violence going for more than a decade without restocking, without replenishing? Did
That's
Gaddafi
a hell
have
of
that
a
much
problem.
military
Yeah,
technology sitting in stockpiles? So I think
yeah,
it's a very important question to ask. Military equipment is not cheap, and military equipment can't be bought off the shelf. It's very expensive, and it has to be bought using very specific supply chains. A lot of this the military hardware that is being discovered in the hands of these terrorists, such as, for example, armed drones, you then have to ask the question, where is a terrorist getting a military grade drone from? Those things are not sold off the shelf. You
right.
don't buy those things off the black market. Maybe you can buy a rocket launcher off the black market, maybe the Stinger missile, maybe. But like an armed drone, the sort that is being used against Russia by Ukraine, for example, this has been identified in Nigeria by the Nigerian military that um, Boko Haram has been seen using Ukraine style armed drones or suicide drones. So you then start to ask yourself, these are supposedly, semi-literate, uneducated, rubber slippers wearing, not very intelligent Islamists trekking through the Sahel without showering for days. So where is the expertise and know-how for operating that sort of extremely advanced equipment, right? We're talking about when we talk about military drones, we're not talking about your civilian DJIs that work at short distance or that you can put a 4G SIM card into it. And no, this is stuff that requires like satellite connections with huge running costs, right? We're talking about drones that have like $1,000 per hour running costs. So
Yeah,
where on earth are these people getting such equipment from? That's a very important question to ask. And more importantly, the entities that manufacture this equipment and that control these supply chains, who are those entities? Where are those supply chains residents? Where Sorry, there's a phone ringing in the background, so that's the noise that you're hearing. We're
you're
just gonna
fine.
have
No,
to
you're fine.
do it.
I don't
So
even hear it. I don't even
where,
hear it, to be honest.
if you recall, I think this was last year. I think this was June last year, where a an attack was carried out in Mali by this so-called JNIM. Was it JNIM? No, the supposed Free Azawad movement. So essentially, there's a group in northern Mali that are trying. It's like a breakaway sort of secessionist group, which is
Mhm.
being funded by France. So they call themselves the Republic of Azawad. They're officially recognized by the Malian government as a terrorist entity. Right. So they carried out an ambush against the Malian military and they supposedly killed 40 Malian soldiers along with several Russian private military contractors that were accompanying them. And the Ukrainians came out and proudly took credit for this attack, claiming that they supplied intelligence to
Wow.
these terrorists to carry out this stageless attack against the big bad Russians because part of the Ukrainian strategy is to basically globalize the war against Russia. So then you'd have to ask the question, if Ukraine, which is essentially a NATO proxy, is supplying these terrorists in the Sahel with intelligence, what else could it be supplying them with? And I think I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. W- I guess the secondary question is beyond that point, what are the terrorists claiming they're doing this for? I mean, for all intents and purposes, they're just murdering people, civilians. What is the
Yes.
objective that they're trying to accomplish, or the very least, let's say their stated objective?
As far as it's possible to tell, um, so there. Yeah, hello,
Yeah, I can hear you
hello,
now. I can hear you. Can you
right.
hear me? Okay.
Yeah. So
I think he just froze. Okay, he froze. He'll be back. He'll be back. He'll be back. He has my infinite trust that he will be back. All right, he'll be back. Oh, there we are.
Um, yeah, I'm
There you are.
having. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is with my Wi-Fi,
It's
but
okay.
this is. Yeah,
It is
this is.
okay.
It's not.
That's the
It's not.
first. Yeah,
It's
that's
not
only
the
the
best.
first glitch. You're fine.
Right. So as I was saying, in the Sahelian alliance, as far as it's possible to tell, the primary goal of these terrorists seems to be to discredit the governments of the Sahelian alliance. So they're no longer trying to like take over huge swathes of territory as they once did. They're no longer trying to stage attacks against the capital and things like that. But
Hmm.
they seem to have adopted a strategy of carrying out these sort of hit and run attacks in like littoral areas. So like areas near the border and stuff. So they carry out a hit and run strike. And then I guess their media amplifiers in the Western media then make a whole song and dance out of it. So recently there was an attack on a fuel tanker convoy in Mali. Next thing you know, the BBC and the rest of the Western media go out with this headline that terrorists have blockaded Bamako, that's the capital of Mali. They're preventing fuel from getting in. The situation is critical, and yada yada. Meanwhile, the very next day, a new fuel convoy, which was under the protection of the Malian Air Force, made its way into Bamako, and the fuel scarcity was ended. That
Yeah.
wasn't reported. So it would seem like, as far as the Sahel goes, a good part of the strategy is basically to discredit the Sahelian governments. Now in Nigeria, that's where I guess the picture gets a bit more complicated because Nigeria um, is not on the wrong side of, I guess, the people who are trying to discredit the Sahelian governments. Nigeria is
Hmm.
basically a U.S. client state. So this is where it gets confusing for most people because most people aren't able to understand. If Nigeria is basically a US and French ally, why is Nigeria suffering from terrorism? You know, it
Right.
should just be a staging point, and those other people should be the victims, not Nigeria. But the thing is, even though Nigeria is being run by a client administration, by a puppet administration, just by its existence, just by its structure, Nigeria remains considered to be some kind of a threat, regardless of who is in power, regardless of who is the president, regardless of how it's governed. Just by its existence, it's considered to be a threat. So I would imagine that the strategy for the terrorists in Nigeria is not just it's not even to disgrace the Nigerian government, to discredit the Nigerian government, um, is to pick away at the very seams, the very corporate existence of the country. And I guess this is where pronouncements like the ones you heard recently from Donald Trump start to get important. You may have noticed that shortly after made those noises about potentially carrying out airstrikes in Nigeria and all of that, his what do you call them? His cheerleaders, like white nationalist cheerleaders in the US and
Yes.
Europe, started flying a kite, this flying kites across social media, talking about how potentially Nigeria needs to be split up. Some are talking about splitting it into a north and a south. Some are talking about splitting it into multiple countries. There's a particular guy, I forget his name. He works with NATO. He actually put out a map of Africa with Nigeria divided into like six countries. So I would imagine
Really?
they have ultimately the design like a North Sudan, South Sudan type of solution for dealing with Nigeria. Because just by existing, Nigeria continues to be a threat. So I guess what their strategy is for Africa, which is to keep it poor, fragmented, disunited, unable to aggregate itself into something that is greater than the sum of its parts. So that's what we're currently dealing with.
What was the reporting on the ground when Donald Trump made this notion of militarily invading Nigeria? I mean, as you point out, Nigeria is run by a puppet. And despite the
Mm.
fact that Nigeria is run by a puppet, they're still talking about militarily invading and attacking Nigeria. Now, it's unclear whether Donald Trump is being entirely serious about this, but the United States is run by psychopaths. So you can't necessarily put it past them when he says stuff like this. What was the response to this?
So the response was twofold in Nigeria. So there were those who there were those like me who came out to immediately to strongly condemn this because obviously we understand very clearly that Nigeria is a sovereign country. And regardless of whatever pretext that anyone tries to use, talking about whether there's a genocide or whatever it is that may or may not be happening, it's simply not anybody's prerogative to waltz
Right.
into a country and carry out military action. That's just
Right.
not, those are not the rules on which the world is supposed to operate. It's a sovereign country. It has a military. If you feel so strongly about what may or may not be happening, engage it diplomatically, right? That's what those diplomatic channels are for. If you feel like this country um, is not doing something you'd like it to do in a military sense, it's letting certain people die or whatever, you can offer military aid. You can do a bunch of things. Why are you
Mhm.
threatening to essentially invade someone else's country? A sovereign, especially a country that has the history that the US does in terms of invading other people's countries. So there was that reaction,
Yes.
which I would say, unfortunately, was probably the minority reaction.
Was
The
it?
Yes, now the
How was that the
majority
minority?
reaction,
Oh, please, I'm sorry.
yeah, so yeah, you're probably not going to enjoy what I'm about to say. So the majority reaction was split into two. There were those who had this sort of studied indifference to it, like, well, the Nigerian government brought it on itself, so whatever, you know, it is what it is. They did this to themselves. There was this weird sense of detachment, as though if the US government or the US military were to invade Nigeria, it would invade the Nigerian government and it wouldn't invade the Nigerian people. Or there seems to be this weird disconnect. People don't really understand that regardless of whether or not you approve of your government, regardless of whether or not you like your government, your country is your country. And if you let someone else destroy it for you, it's not going to matter whether you like the government or not, because you're not going to have a country any longer. Especially being that we're two borders away from the greatest example of this, which is Libya.
Yes.
So that was where. And then the second half of the second group were those who were openly cheerleading for this, those who were ecstatic because I'm going to use a term you've probably heard before, which is mental colonization, right? These are a very large group of Nigerians who have this very unfortunate idea that they are sort of deputy Americans. A lot of the media they consume is either American media or US funded. Most media they consume is US funded in some way, shape, or form. Nigeria's entire information space has been cornered for decades. So these are people who grew up watching and consuming American content and entertainment, reading American funded news and current affairs, and engaging the world from an American point of view. Right. So these are people who think, right, the big daddy, the superhero in the movie is here to save the day. Captain America is coming in to come and save us. So trying to explain to these people that when Captain America comes in to save a country, that country ends up looking like
Libya.
what Laos or Cambodia or Vietnam looked like, or what Libya currently looks like,
Yeah.
or what Syria looks like. That's actually, or Afghanistan. That's actually what Captain America's intervention looks like. They don't understand what you're saying at all, because all they know is that America is the good guy, and these people, this group of people that we hate, call them terrorists, call them Islamists. Some even just hate Muslims as a whole, right? These people are the bad guys. So the good guy is here to save the bad guys, to save us from the bad guys, right? So the bad
They
guys are
didn't.
going to be defeated, and finally we shall be free because Big Daddy Uncle Sam, and what further complicates this, in ways that I personally find so dismaying is that a large proportion of this group of people that I've just described, they happen to be Christian, and not just Christian in the religious sense. They happen to be um, they're the type of Christians who, again, because there's been this U.S. capture of Nigeria's information space. So these people have grown up watching Kenneth Haji, whatever his name is. They've grown up
Oh, the
watching
press, the
basically all
preacher.
the big US prosperity preachers. They've grown up
Yes.
watching these people, and then they graduated to people like Charlie Kirk and whatnot. By the way, when Charlie Kirk died, there was a whole thing in Nigeria. Some people had a meltdown because There again, there was this idea that
Really?
oh, this guy's a soldier of Christ. He's one of us. So the fact that this guy, the fact that this guy was basically a racist who didn't rate black people, didn't even register because they don't even see themselves as Africans or as black people in that sense. They just see themselves as Christian. So
David, you
they
can't be serious.
imagine. So this demographic of people imagines that when Stephen Miller talks about Christianity, that what he's describing is what they are familiar with as Christianity. So the concept of Christian nationalism, which is a concept that should horrify them, being the black people that they are, they don't even
Yes.
understand what it means. They think that Christian nationalism is a good thing because it's Christian. It's about worshiping Jesus. So there's
That's
that very significant demographic who believe that you know Uncle Sam is here to save them, because and then Donald Trump obviously kind of I believe this was deliberate. He kind of leaned into that with his message where he talked about we're here to save our precious Christians. So, a lot of people just their heads absolutely were absolutely blown by that. Oh my God, we have been recognized by the President of the United States. And he called us, so we are important to the greatest power in the world. So and then you have people like me who have spent months or years trying to let this demographic know that in the geographical calculation of the world, your life is not really rated that like that, right? Like these people really don't care whether you're Christian or you're Muslim, whatever. What's important is the resources under your feet. And then Donald
yes.
Trump comes and puts out that kind of statement and says, "Oh, Christians." So you can imagine how to those people it just looks like everything I'm saying has been nonsense, right? Because the president of the United States has acknowledged us directly. So every idea that we had about the primacy of Christianity as our primary identity layer has been validated by the fact that the president of the United States has name checked us. So
David, that's
that's
disturbing.
that's the
That's so
situation that we're
disturbing. God,
dealing with.
that's so
So
disturbing.
yeah.
I mean, did they not see? And I guess people in Nigeria may be similar to people in the States in the way they watch media, but they didn't see Donald Trump shaking hands with Jelani in Syria. Basically, saying how he's a tough guy, tough history. The guy was literally chopping off heads. The hand that Donald Trump shook was the hand that he used to literally cut off human beings' heads, separate the head from their shoulders. Meaning
So
that is
as,
Trump legitimizing terrorism. Like we were backing that stuff. We were paying for that stuff. They don't see that.
as I'm sure you're aware, one significant drawback of engaging with religious people is that the very nature of religion makes it such that I guess, the logical core of your brain is completely bypassed because religion is completely emotional. It's
Yeah.
not an intellectual thing. So when that being the case, you have the ability to selectively remember things, and you have the ability to selectively forget what you choose to forget.
So
So
they
there's a
edit
part of
that
your
out.
brain that knows very well that Donald Trump is, first of all, he's not a Christian of any description, not in any meaningful sense. There's a part of your
Mhm.
brain that knows that. There's nothing about this guy's lifestyle. There's nothing about this guy, even what he professes to be, that is Christian, first of all, on the one side. And then going further, you also understand that um, this guy has shaken hands with the devil multiple times. This guy is in bed with everyone it's possible to be in bed with. The Arab Muslims that you think are your enemies, this guy is, they gave him a jet as a gift. The Qataris, right?
Right.
The Saudis
Right.
are his very good friends, going back from well before he became president.
Yeah.
So they've been his financiers for decades. So there's a part of your brain that knows all this information, but because that information clashes with this other thing that you want to believe, which is that Donald Trump is a soldier of Christ who's here to save you from the Muslims, you then decide which of those things that you want to have primacy in your head. And because that second narrative is the one that you want to believe more, you just choose to ignore the other stuff. So yes, he shook hands with Al Jolani, the Syrian head chopper. It doesn't matter. I'm just not going to acknowledge it. I'm just not going to remember temporarily because that doesn't I guess doesn't match with the narrative that I wish were the case.
That's disturbing. That's very disturbing to me. Um, they seem to be downplaying the significance of the United States invading a country and what that means when we invade a country, and even the larger motives that may be associated with it. So, in their mind, the US is doing this for altruistic reasons. We're just coming to
Yes.
save Christians. That's what they think,
Yes.
even though we've never done that anywhere else around the globe. Like, there is no situation where the United States acted in an altruistic way in regards to invading countries or going after countries. There's always something involved that we want to get. But in their minds,
Yeah, but
it's
at this point, I think at this point you're preaching to the choir because these are not people who again are intellectually driven. These are people who are emotionally driven. The emotional narrative that they want to believe is that we are Christian. No, so I guess the important context here is that for the longest of time in Nigeria, there's been, first of all, an ethnic rivalry, roughly speaking, between North and South. And because the
okay.
North is roughly speaking majority Muslim and the South is roughly speaking majority Christian, even though there's a significant Muslim population in the South as well. So for the longest time, and because Nigeria has fought a civil war before, which even though it wasn't necessarily fought along religious lines, there was a significant ethnic component in that war, and because the I guess the ethnic group that was on what you would call the losing side of the war was almost entirely Christian,
Hmm.
and then the groups that were perceived to be the winners of the war, and certainly the Nigerian military was dominated by members of one ethnicity who are overwhelmingly Muslim. So the idea was created in some quarters that Muslims defeated Christians and Muslims slaughtered Christians during the Civil War.
I
So that's an
see.
idea that has existed for a very long time. So there's this deep wellspring of resentment. There's this deep grudge which has been there for decades, right? So then when you add to that the fact that when Boko Haram first became a thing, before it started slaughtering Muslims in the industrial numbers that it did, initially how it gained attention was that it went around like bombing churches, stuff like that. So it was very easy to sell a narrative that, oh my God, the Muslims are here again. The Muslims are here to kill us. They're here to finish us off, because and so they've always been tensions, they've always been clashes, they've always been deaths in, scattered numbers here and there. When there's an election, for example, it's in 2011, the election that took place where the two front runners, that's the incumbent and the challenger, one was Christian, one was Muslim. So that election took on that characterization, and the incumbent won. He was a Christian, and there was a riot in the north, which is majority Muslim, and over 800 people died. So these resentments have been there for a very long time. So it's very easy to see why, for some, it really doesn't matter what people like me have to say. Doesn't matter how much data we can show. Doesn't matter whether we can prove what we're saying intellectually. All they know is that the Christians are the victims and the good guys. The Muslims are the aggressors and the bad guys. And anyone who is here to fight for the Christians and fight against the Muslims and get rid of the Muslims for us is the good person. So the world in their minds is divided into this very binary place, which obviously
Christians
you and
versus
I know
Muslims.
that's not how the world works at all.
That is
But
not the way the
in
world
there they
works.
have been conditioned they have been conditioned to see the world exclusively in terms of who is Christian and who is Muslim, to the point where even during the genocide in Gaza, the entire conversation in Nigeria was basically defined by who was Christian and who was Muslim. So
Are you
those who consider
serious?
themselves, yeah, those who consider themselves to be Christian were supporting Israel because they thought that as being a Zionist or whatever somehow puts you, on the side of Jesus,
It
right?
doesn't. But it doesn't.
And then
They've destroyed
those who
every
consider
church.
and then those who consider themselves Muslim were obviously on the side of Palestine, not because there was any real intellectual understanding of the monstrosity that Palestine is undergoing and the wider implications for the rest of the world, but simply because all Palestinians are Muslims. So they are Muslim brothers. So
That's
that's the
so disturbing.
very
That's
unfortunate
so
reality that
disturbing.
Nigeria deals with.
Do you know they destroyed every church that was in Gaza? Just eliminated every church. They didn't care if they were Christians. They didn't care if they were Muslim. They just wanted to take the land. Like the idea that that's this. Oh God, man, that sucks so bad. Because to me, I
Yeah,
look at it and say,
several
human beings are being killed. That's the way I look at it, right? And they're looking at it as, well, they're killing Muslims, so it's okay.
yeah. And if you were to tell them, for example, that there's a significant Palestinian Christian population, they'd look at you funny. Because I've actually told someone this before and he accused me of lying. That
But
I
there
made
is a
it up.
significant Palestinian Christian population.
Yeah, but I was accused of lying. I made it up. All Palestinians are, rag wearing Arab Muslim terrorists. Apparently, you know, I should also
Okay.
mention that
Wow.
in as much as US media obviously plays a very large role in
Just
this
wow.
large scale industrial brainwashing of Nigerians, it probably won't surprise you to know that there's also a lot of Israeli presence as well. Maybe not as
In Nigeria.
visible as the US presence, but the Israeli presence, the Israeli influence is there as well. So a lot of these narratives, which people now believe, were not organic, right? Something pushed them into people's
Yeah.
minds. And if you examine where the funding pipeline of that something is, a lot of the time it leads back to Tel Aviv. And I'll give you an example of this. So for partly as a result of the civil war, right? Because the civil war, the region that tried to succeed, which as I said was majority Christian and dominated by one ethnic group, even after the war, that secessionist idea continued. It didn't
Mhm.
die after the war. So the people you hear calling themselves Biafran separatists, that's where that came from. And sometimes, so I grew up understanding Biafran separatism to be like a thing that was discussed by like men in their 50s and the 60s who witnessed the war and who had grudges. It was an old people's thing.
Yeah.
Then, sometime around 2012, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there appears this charismatic young, for lack of a better term, leader who emerges, and his name is Nnamdi Kanu. He emerged pretty much out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, he set up like a pirate radio station called Radio Biafra, and it had reach all over that region of Nigeria, and he became this extremely powerful, influential figure. And then the violence started because then he started encouraging his followers to take up arms and things like that.
Wow.
And currently, he's in prison now. He's accused of terrorism and all of that. But the point is, when you then
Came out of
examine
nowhere.
how all of this happened, how did that meteoric rise happen pretty much out of nowhere? You realize, for example, that this guy, um, so Biafra, the ethnic group that makes up the majority of what calls itself Biafra is the Igbo ethnic group, right? These are West Africans. These have always been West Africans. They are 102% West African with a 2% margin of error. If you to quote a popular joke, right? All of a sudden, out of nowhere, you start hearing about how they're supposedly the 12th tribe of Israel, the 13th, the lost tribe of Israel, and they have a Jewish origin. And then the
Uh-huh.
Biafran flag, which has always been the flag, was inspired by the tricolor flag of Marcus Garvey. That's the red, black, and the green, right?
Yeah.
That has always been the Biafran flag. All of a sudden, a Star of David appears in the middle of the Biafran flag,
What?
right? And then
Oh, it's wild.
this guy, the leader, Nnamdi Kanu, he shows up like out of nowhere. He appears that that famous wall in Israel that people go and do
Yeah,
that
the
thing.
Wailing Wall. Yeah.
He shows up there and there's a photo up and he's dressed in like the traditional like Hebrew outfit with the thing on his head. And it's like, what is going on here? I thought you were an ethnic Igbo separatist who was Christian. Now all of a sudden you're talking about, yeah, infusing like Jewish mythology into this separatist idea that you have. And then Radio Biafra has resources that nobody can explain how. So there was I think it was in 2015 or 2016, the largest telecoms company in Nigeria is called MTN. Um, they discovered that some of their engineers had actually been paid to install Radio Biafra transmitters on MTN mobile telecoms masts. So basically, MTN infrastructure was being used as a piggyback for this Radio Biafra thing. So you now then ask yourself, this thing which basically started off as a YouTube channel, with which money were they able to get radio transmitters? These things are not cheap.
They
And you're
hijacked
talking about a
Ukrainian.
region like the entire southeastern region of Nigeria. That's at least 200,000 square kilometers. That everywhere is covered by this radio station. How did they get transmitters in that number and of that quality to cover the entirety of a region of Nigeria with this blanket propaganda message? Yeah. And when you dig into it, almost inevitably everything leads back to Tel Aviv. So that's where all of this is coming from. It's not because Nigerian people are just dumb, right? There's been an industrial brainwashing effort from so many different angles to ensure that people are conditioned to see the world in ways that are not true, to see the world in very reductive, foolish binaries, and to
Yeah.
see pictures that are not there, and to identify themselves in ways that are not useful to their own development.
Well, David, I am always you always educate me every time you come on. I swear to God, you do. I learned so much in these conversations, and I hope the audience also does. Thank you for this. Honest to God, man, I really appreciate it. David Hundeyin, he is investigative journalist, author, filmmaker, founder of West Africa Weekly and 2023 James Carey Fellow at Cambridge University. Also, Spearhead radio, online platform. Definitely check it out. And where can he find this one more time? I have Spearhead AF.
Spearhead underscore AF, Twitter,
Spear,
Instagram, TikTok.
badass man. Thank you for this, David. You be safe, okay?
Thank you for having me.
Bye bye.